Before we start the stories, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a nice comment that suits you. The nightmare began 3 weeks ago and hasn't stopped since. Every time I close my eyes, I see Tyler's face from that last dinner, laughing at something funny Kevin said about the shrimp at the buffet. Back then, I was a beginner accountant, 26 years old, living in a cramped apartment in Chicago with 3 friends who had become my closest buddies since college. We had been planning this cruise trip in the Caribbean for almost 4 years, saving money, taking time off work, and getting everything ready. The trip was supposed to be a huge celebration before 2 of us are moving on to new jobs far away. The 4 of us, me, Tyler, Kevin, and Josh, booked rooms next to each other on the 7th floor of the Coral Princess ship. Tyler was always the spontaneous one, pushing us to try new things, while Kevin kept us grounded with his practical jokes. Josh documented everything with his camera. We've been friends since our first year at college, and this trip felt like the perfect way to wrap up this chapter of our lives. The ship was huge, like a floating city full of pools, restaurants, and entertainment spots. We spent the first 2 days exploring it, trying out different bars, and planning our tours. We were anchored at the ports. Tyler had this weird habit. He'd wake up super early just to watch the sunrise from the upper deck. He'd been doing it since day one, always with his coffee and that old journal he carried everywhere. He was obsessed with capturing perfect moments, whether it was snapping photos of the ocean or jotting down random thoughts about life. On the 3rd morning, he mentioned seeing some crew members arguing loudly near the restricted areas around 5 a.m. We laughed it off during breakfast when he said they looked like they were discussing something serious, not just the usual ship stuff. But Tyler kept bringing it up all day, asking us about it. We noticed something strange about some of the crew that night. Everything just felt different. We had dinner in the main restaurant, and Tyler was more alert than usual, scanning the dining hall and pointing out crew members he'd seen during his morning rounds. He kept tracking their movements and shift changes, and we figured his analytical mind was just bored. During dessert, he came over and whispered that he'd overheard 2 janitors speaking quickly in Spanish about someone else, but when they noticed he was listening, they suddenly switched to English and changed the subject. The way he described their reaction, sudden silence, nervous looks, and then leaving, was pretty telling. He suddenly made us stop talking for a moment. We spent the rest of the night at the casino, then caught a late comedy show before heading back to our rooms around 1 in the morning. Tyler's room, number 7142, was right next to mine, and as usual, we said goodnight through the shared door. I remember hearing him moving around in his room for about 20 minutes, opening and closing drawers, running water, the usual bedtime routine. The last thing I heard was the TV playing a late-night talk show, which wasn't unusual since he often fell asleep with the TV on. The waves were rough that night, and the ship's rocking actually helped me fall asleep faster than usual. Usually, at 6:45 in the morning, there was a loud knock on my door. I remember looking at the digital clock, feeling groggy and tired, wondering why the cleaning staff had to be so rough so early. But it wasn't the cleaners. It was Kevin and Josh, both looking panicked and talking at the same time. They had gone to Tyler's room to surprise him with coffee and pastries from the breakfast buffet, but he wasn't there. His bed was still made, and his notebook was open on the desk with fresh writing from the night before. The balcony door was wide open, and the curtains were fluttering in the morning breeze. His coffee machine was already set up for his usual 5 a.m. routine in the morning, but the timer didn't work. We immediately called the ship's security, and within minutes, the hallway was filled with crew members. The head of security, a tough woman named Captain Martinez, took our statements efficiently. She seemed experienced, like she'd done this many times before. She asked about Tyler's mental state, if he drank a lot, had a history of sleepwalking or depression. Her questions seemed well prepared, as if she'd asked them many times before. When we mentioned Tyler's notes about crew conversations and his habit of exploring restricted areas, her tone changed a bit, becoming more formal. She said that sometimes passengers misunderstand routine operational discussions, and that Tyler he had an unfortunate accident during his morning routine. 2 hours later, the ship announced a sad message about a passenger who fell overboard during the night, followed by a minute of silence. What bothered me was that they didn't properly search the ship. There was no organized room-by-room check, and no announcement asking passengers to report anything unusual. Instead, they immediately started the man overboard protocol, scanning the ocean surface with binoculars and contacting the Coast Guard. When Josh suggested reviewing the security camera footage from the decks, Captain Martinez explained that the cameras in that area were under maintenance. The timing seemed incredibly suspicious, and the explanation came way too quickly. It was like he had planned it earlier that afternoon. We were sitting in the main lounge, trying to process what had happened, when we overheard a conversation that confirmed our suspicions. 2 crew members, a maintenance guy and someone from guest services, were quietly talking at a nearby table, probably thinking we couldn't hear them over the noise. The maintenance guy mentioned this was the 3rd time this season and said they needed to be more careful when picking the right candidates. The woman from guest services cut him off right away, reminding him that management handles the documentation and their job was just to keep the schedule. When they realized we were listening, they stopped talking. Suddenly, they all left in different directions. We spent the rest of the day quietly investigating, talking to other passengers, and casually asking if they'd noticed anything strange. An elderly couple from Texas told us they heard an argument upstairs around 2 a.m., but when they looked out from their balcony, they only saw crew members cleaning equipment. A woman traveling alone said she saw someone being escorted through the service corridors the night before, but she assumed it was just a drunk passenger being helped back to their room. Every story we heard painted a picture of some nighttime activity that didn't quite fit with the ship's usual operations. The crew became increasingly inconsistent. When we asked more questions about their procedures and protocols, things got really tense. The breaking point was on the last night aboard the ship. Josh was documenting everything on his phone, taking photos, notes, recording conversations, and planning to contact the authorities as soon as we reached the port. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, 2 crew members claimed they needed to search his room due to reported maintenance issues. They were polite but persistent. When Josh refused, they showed him an official-looking document related to mandatory safety inspections as they began searching his room. His phone mysteriously disappeared from the bedside table. The crew didn't find any issues and left after 20 minutes, but Josh's belongings were gone. Later, Captain Martinez explained that phones sometimes get lost during rough waves and offered to help file a lost property claim. We left the ship the next morning, feeling sad and frustrated, knowing we wouldn't get any real answers about what happened to Tyler. 2 weeks later, the cruise company sent an official letter expressing condolences and stating that their investigation concluded Tyler accidentally fell overboard during his morning routine. They included a small compensation check and asked us to sign a document confirming it. Their thorough investigation didn't pin the blame on any of us. Instead, Kevin found a maritime lawyer who specializes in cruise ship accidents and told us that Tyler wasn't the first passenger to disappear from that ship. There have been at least 6 similar cases over the past 3 years. All were classified as accidents, and all involved passengers who were asking questions or exploring areas they weren't supposed to be in. The lawyer is still building the case, but the cruise company has a strong legal team, and most of these incidents happen in international waters where jurisdiction is complicated. I think about Tyler every day and wonder if he uncovered something that made him a threat to their operations, and if we, one day, will find out the truth about what happened that night. What went down on that cruise ship will haunt me forever. I'm a 34-year-old accountant from Denver. Last September, I booked a trip on the Ocean Majesty to spend a relaxing week in the Caribbean. After 2 years of grinding 60 hours a week at my company, I finally got the promotion I'd been chasing. But during my annual checkup, my doctor started commenting on how stressed I was. The cruise seemed like the perfect remedy: 7 days of unlimited food, chilling by the pool, and no spreadsheets in sight. I'd never been on a cruise before, but the brochure looked promising. It looked like a floating paradise with huge pools, multiple restaurants, and enough entertainment to keep everyone busy. The first 3 days were exactly how I wished. I spent my mornings on the 7th floor with a paperback novel, wandered the endless ship corridors in the afternoons, and tried different restaurants in the evenings. Ocean Majesty was like a floating city, carrying nearly 4,000 passengers and crew, with decks that seemed to stretch on forever. I met a retired couple from Portland, Janet and Robert, who had been on dozens of cruises and always pointed out the best spots on the ship. Janet had a great laugh. I could hear noises coming from 3 tables over in the dining hall, and Robert was always wearing these weird Hawaiian shirts that somehow looked kinda stylish on him. We started meeting every morning for breakfast at the restaurant on the calm deck, where the coffee was strong and the ocean views were amazing. But on the 4th morning, Wednesday, everything changed. I woke up around 6:30 a.m. with a strange feeling. The ship felt different. Not the smooth motion I was used to, but more shaky, like it was jerking around. The engines sounded off too, like they were working harder than usual. I thought maybe we were heading into bad weather, but when I pulled back the curtain, on the balcony, the ocean looked pretty calm. The morning sun was casting a golden path across the water, and I spotted a few other ships on the horizon. Something unusual since we'd been almost alone in the open sea for the past 3 days. I got dressed and headed to meet Janet and Robert for breakfast, hoping they'd have some explanation for the ship's strange behavior. When I got to the dining room, the mood was tense. Conversations were quiet, and I noticed several crew members gathered near the coffee corner, talking urgently. Janet and Robert were at our usual table, but they looked worried instead of their usual joking selves. The usual morning. Robert was wearing an orange Hawaiian shirt decorated with palm trees, but his face looked pale beneath his tropical tan. Janet wasn't smiling at all. She held her coffee cup with both hands and stared out the window at the distant ships. As soon as she sat down, Janet leaned in and whispered that she'd heard some worrying rumors from other passengers. Apparently, people said the ship had taken an unexpected route overnight, and some crew members seemed genuinely concerned about their destination. Around 8 in the morning, the ship's loudspeaker crackled to life with Captain Harrison's voice. It was deep and confident, like usual, when he announced dinner reservations or entertainment schedules. But this time he looked nervous. He announced that due to navigational adjustments, all passengers had to return to their rooms immediately and stay there until further notice. He didn't give any explanation or timeline, just a direct order that sent chills through everyone in the dining hall. The crew, who had been whispering, suddenly started guiding passengers gently but firmly toward the elevators. I saw families with small kids gathering their things, with confusion and worry clear on their faces. There was a little girl, maybe about 6, asking her mom why they couldn't go to the pool, and her mom replied with a voice that didn't sound very convinced. Soon, my walk to the room felt like a funeral procession. The ship's hallways, which had been full of laughter and excitement the past 3 days, were now eerily quiet, except for the sound of footsteps and nervous whispers. I passed the main deck on my way to the elevator and caught sight of something that made my chest tighten. Those distant ships weren't tourist or cargo vessels. They were military ships getting closer. Their gray hulls cut steadily through the water, and I saw figures in military uniforms moving on their decks. The morning sun reflected off equipment that clearly wasn't meant for fishing or transport. I pressed the elevator button multiple times, feeling, suddenly, I felt an urgent need to get to my room and try to figure out what was going on. As soon as I closed my door, I headed straight to the balcony and peeked through the glass door. The military ships were now close enough for me to see details that made my heart race. There were at least 4 ships forming what looked like a blockade around us, flying flags I didn't recognize. Red with a symbol I couldn't make out from this distance. The biggest ship had a helipad, and I saw armed people moving on its deck. Through my room's walls, I could hear the other passengers whispering, scared. There was a woman. The room next door was crying, and I heard them trying to calm her down. The ship's engines almost went completely silent, and we were barely moving, just drifting, while the military ships held their positions around us like we were some kind of prize they were guarding. Around 8 in the morning, the loudspeaker came on again, but this time, it wasn't Captain Harrison's voice. It was a strange, foreign voice introducing himself as Commander Valdez from the Naval Defense Force. His words sent chills down my spine. He announced that the Ocean Majesty had entered forbidden territorial waters without permission and was now under military escort. He ordered all passengers to stay in their rooms while the situation was handled. Handling the matter through the proper diplomatic channels felt like I was being treated like cargo, not a person. After the announcement ended, an eerie silence fell over the ship, so quiet that even the ocean sounds seemed muffled. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Time dragged on with no updates. I tried calling the reception desk, but the line was busy. I attempted to use the ship's Wi-Fi to contact my family, but the internet was down. From the balcony door, I could see the military ships holding their positions, no more than a few hundred yards away. Around 2 p.m., I heard airplanes. There were not just one, but several helicopters above us. Their rotors made a thunderous noise that shook the entire ship. I pressed my face against the glass and watched them circle overhead like mechanical vultures. One of the helicopters was much bigger than the others, and I saw figures in military uniforms descending by ropes onto the upper deck of our ship. Seeing armed soldiers actually boarding our ship was unbelievably scary. This wasn't some misunderstanding that could be sorted out with phone calls. We were trapped in the middle of an international incident. The worst part was the uncertainty. No one knew what was happening or how long it would last. I heard children crying in distant rooms, and the elderly couple was. In the hallway, they were arguing heatedly about whether they should try to leave their room. The man insisted they had rights as American citizens, while his wife begged him not to do anything that might make things worse. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy shoes, not the soft ones the staff usually wore. There was a sharp knock on someone's door, followed by a quiet conversation in a language that sounded like Spanish. Then another knock, closer to my room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat when the knocking came at my door. I stood there, frozen, scared to open it, but just as scared of what might happen if I didn't. I finally opened the door. There was a soldier in military uniform standing in the hallway next to one of the young ship crew members named Lisa, who had been serving drinks at the pool bar just yesterday. Lisa looked terrified. Her usual bright smile was replaced by barely hidden fear. The soldier was checking room numbers against a list and asked for my ID in a heavy English accent. His uniform was clean and precise, with badges I didn't recognize and gear that looked practical and serious. After checking my passport or ID card, he moved on to the next door. My eyes caught Lisa for a moment, and I saw her whisper a quick, "Sorry," before they continued down the hall. The brief interaction made everything feel more real. Seeing someone I had laughed with just a few days ago now acting as a terrified guide for foreign soldiers was surreal. Around 7 in the evening, Captain Harris's voice came over the loudspeaker, but he sounded like a completely different person. His confident tone was replaced by something close to defeat. He announced that the ship had actually entered disputed territorial waters due to what he called navigational errors, and that diplomatic negotiations were underway. He assured us that our safety was the top priority, and that we needed to stay calm and patient. But then, he said something that made my body freeze. He mentioned that the ship's original course had been changed to improve fuel efficiency, and that this decision led to our current situation. As I was taking in his words, I realized someone had deliberately chosen to save money by cutting through forbidden waters, and now 4,000 people were paying the price. The tension stayed high all night, with military ships holding their positions and armed men patrolling our decks. We were released the next morning after intense diplomatic negotiations, as I later found out, but the cruise company quietly settled the lawsuit and fired Captain Harris within weeks. I never really knew whose waters we had entered, but I'll never forget that feeling of complete helplessness in the middle of it all. The ocean trapped between corporate greed and international politics. Music. I used to work as a pharmaceutical sales rep, which meant constant travel. But the Mediterranean cruise was supposed to be different. The first real vacation I'd had in 3 years. At 28, I felt completely drained, living off empty energy for months, closing deals and staying in hotels all over the Midwest. The trip was a birthday gift to myself, 7 days completely away from spreadsheets and work calls. I picked the Celestial Horizon cruise ship specifically because of its fancy food and luxury amenities. The ship was huge, carrying about 4,000 passengers. Somehow, she felt a connection with its marble lobby and crystal chandeliers that caught the Mediterranean light in dazzling colors. The trouble started on the 3rd day at sea, after leaving Barcelona port. I was looking forward to dinner at Bazzo Nero, the ship's top restaurant on the 12th floor. The reservation cost me an extra $200, but the reviews promised an unforgettable dining experience. The restaurant manager, a tall man with silver hair and an Italian accent, greeted me and seated me at a corner table overlooking the endless ocean. The vibe was perfect: soft jazz music, candles flickering on white tablecloths, and the gentle sway of the ship creating a cozy atmosphere, a magical rhythm. I ordered the chef's tasting menu, 7 dishes paired with wines I'd never heard of before, but I trusted the sommelier's recommendations. Everything was perfect, from the appetizers to the final dessert, a delicate panna cotta that melted on my tongue like silk. The first symptoms showed up around 2 a.m. I woke up feeling what I thought was seasickness, a nauseous feeling in my stomach and a slight headache. But as I lay in my room listening to the hum of the ship's engines, I realized this was different. The nausea came in waves with sharp cramps that made me curl up in my narrow bed. I'd been on cruise ships before and never felt seasick. The ship was rocking violently. I felt like the room was spinning faster than the ship's normal movement, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I stumbled to the bathroom and barely made it before vomiting violently. The taste was metallic and bitter, nothing like the great meal I enjoyed just hours earlier. Between bouts of throwing up, I heard similar sounds from the neighboring rooms, muffled groans and other people suffering. By morning, the ship's clinic was packed. I managed to get dressed and head up to the 5th floor, where a line of pale, shivering passengers stretched down the hallway. The ship's doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind but worried eyes. She looked worried as she moved from patient to patient, getting more and more urgent. I overheard her quietly talking to a nurse about the unusually high number of cases. Almost 60 people reported similar symptoms overnight. What surprised me was the pattern. Everyone who got sick had dinner at the Zunero buffet last night. Other restaurants, the steakhouse, even the regular pizza place, had guests who were fine. While I waited for about 2 hours, I saw more people stumbling into the clinic, some so weak they needed help walking. The ship's crew kept reassuring us it was just a stomach bug, something that happens on cruises, but their anxious looks and quiet conversations hinted that something wasn't right. The situation worsened quickly over the next 42 hours. What started as severe food poisoning turned into something much more serious. 3 passengers, a senior couple from Ohio, and a young mother traveling with her teenage daughter, were rushed to the ship's ICU after their conditions became critical. Their symptoms went beyond simple stomach inflammation. Severe dehydration, irregular heartbeats, and what the medical staff calmly described as neurological complications. I learned this from Amanda, a nurse I got to know during my frequent visits to the clinic. She worked the night shift and was with the company. 8 years of trips is enough time to know when something's seriously wrong. During one of our conversations, he pulled me aside and whispered that blood tests showed unusually high toxin levels, something he'd never seen in typical food poisoning cases. On the 4th day, the captain finally spoke to the passengers over the loudspeaker, his voice tense. He announced they were conducting a thorough investigation into the isolated incident in Piedazzo Nero, and that all affected passengers would receive full medical care and compensation. But his words felt hollow. I looked around and saw empty seats on the decks and closed room doors. The whole atmosphere had completely changed from how it was before. Jenna Ama started feeling like she was trapped in a prison. The unaffected passengers whispered in small groups, casting suspicious looks at the crew members. The dining halls were half empty. Most people were too scared to eat anything except the sealed meals they'd brought from home. I noticed more security on the ship. Guards stationed at the entrances to restricted areas that used to be freely accessible. The crew's behavior had changed, too. They moved efficiently, but nervously, avoiding eye contact and only talking quietly when they thought passengers weren't listening. The breach happened on the 5th day, and there was no official investigation. I was sitting there, the ship library, one of the few quiet spots left. I overheard a heated conversation between 2 janitors speaking quickly in Spanish, but my college classes helped me catch bits of their talk. They mentioned the name Carlos and revenge. One of them nodded, saying they'd warned management about his behavior months ago. When they noticed I was listening, they quickly split up, but not before I caught the name of the guy they were talking about, Carlos Mendoza, an assistant cook who worked in the Azzo Nero kitchen. Later, Amanda confirmed what I suspected. Carlos had been reprimanded multiple times for how he acted. It seems like the passengers and management ignored the promotion to head chef just weeks before our trip, and the position went to someone less experienced but better at communication. Things started to come together in a pretty scary way. Carlos deliberately contaminated certain dishes during Tuesday's dinner service, targeting the most expensive items ordered only by Belladon Nero clients. But what made it even more terrifying was the precision. He somehow managed to avoid poisoning crew members or passengers from other restaurants, which shows this wasn't some random act of anger but a calculated attack. Amanda told me they found traces of an industrial cleaning solvent mixed with a common kitchen ingredient, something that's being covered up. The taste was there, but it caused serious internal damage. This truth hit me like a physical blow. We weren't just victims of food poisoning, we were victims of one man's attempt to get revenge on the cruise company. The worst part was knowing that Carlos was still on the ship, still biting into the food and walking the halls while the passengers suffered from his deliberate actions. Paranoia became suffocating. Once I realized the truth, every crew member became a potential threat and every meal a possible weapon. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way some crew avoided eye contact, how some seemed to know more than they said, and the hidden tensions between departments. During dinner service, I kept an eye on the kitchen crew through the glass wall, studying their movements. I wondered who else might be involved. Were there other angry staff members? Was Carlos acting alone, or was this part of a bigger conspiracy? These questions consumed me, making it impossible to relax or even enjoy the simple pleasures. I started hoarding snacks from the gift shop, stuff in sealed packages I could trust. Sleep became elusive. Lying in my room, I listened to every step in the hallway, wondering if someone might slip something under my door or tamper with the ventilation system. The ship, which once felt like a floating palace, now seemed like a maze. The turning point came on the 6th day when I saw something that confirmed my worst fears. I was walking near the crew quarters around midnight, unable to sleep, hoping the night air would clear my mind. Through a partially open door, I saw Carlos talking excitedly with 2 crew members I didn't recognize. What scared me was the look of satisfaction on his face, not like someone who'd made a huge mistake, but someone who'd exactly pulled off what he planned. He was pointing upstairs towards the passenger areas, and I caught bits of English mixed with Spanish. I heard him say something about training them. Dersa spoke up about what happens when we're not respected. It seemed like the other crew members were uncomfortable. One of them shook his head and backed away from the conversation. But Carlos kept talking, his voice getting more excited and defensive. That's when I realized he didn't feel any remorse at all. In his mind, he'd gotten revenge on the cruise company and the passengers, and he was proud of it. I knew I had to do something, but being isolated out at sea made everything way more complicated. The next morning, I went to Amanda and told her everything I'd heard and seen. She listened, getting more and more alarmed, confirming that Carlos was indeed scheduled to work in the kitchen during that damn dinner shift. Together, we decided to bypass the ship's security. We suspected some people might be involved or incompetent, so with Amanda's help, we contacted the authorities directly. We used the ship's satellite communication system to reach the Coast Guard, giving them details about Carlos's identity, motives, and the evidence we'd gathered. The response was immediate and decisive. Within hours, a Coast Guard vessel intercepted ours, and federal agents boarded to arrest Carlos. The arrest happened so fast that most passengers didn't even realize what was going on. They just saw extra security moving efficiently through the ship. The case was quickly resolved after Carlos was arrested, confronted with solid evidence and testimony from several crew members who had been too scared to speak up before. Some time ago, Carlos admitted to deliberately contaminating the food with industrial cleaning chemicals. The investigation revealed that he had been planning this attack for weeks, carefully studying the restaurant's procedures and timing his actions to cause maximum harm. All affected passengers were immediately evacuated to a medical facility in Naples, where we received proper treatment for chemical poisoning. The travel company faced a huge lawsuit and eventually went bankrupt, but most importantly, Carlos was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison for attempted murder and biological terrorism. I fully recovered after weeks of treatment, but I can't enjoy fine food the same way anymore. Experience taught me that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces, and sometimes the biggest danger comes from those who feel like they have nothing left to lose. To this day, I still check my food packaging and avoid restaurants where I can't see the kitchen. Some fears never fully go away, even when justice is served. Holla.